Paul Greene-Dennis here. I'm back. And as you can see in the title, it says chill with me as I prepare it should say long form political narration. Long form. Long form. Long form. Actually, let me post a comment. Let me post a comment what it should really say. So, my fault. I'm an idiot. But yeah. Form. This is what it's supposed to say. Long form. So yeah. All right. Now that I'm getting back to it. So if I were, and again, I'm not perfect, but you know what? Might as well open myself up to a few things. If I were to do long form narration of some sort, first of all, you want to be comfortable. Cause hey, you don't just jump straight in, just start straight reading. You could, but I mean, I did that before. But if you want to get more proficient, as I do, um, what you want to do is have something. Obviously, when you're preparing, is have what you're using to read off of. In this case, let me take this off here. My iPad that I'm going to be reading off of. Um, and especially on your iPad, you want to have the PDF in a way that you can mark it up. That's more important. You want to have the PDF so that you can have in a program on your iPad so you can mark things up, okay? When you go through your reads and whatnot. Or when you start, especially when you start to prepare so that you can go through a read. And even though I obviously won't be doing the actual recording yet, per se, you still want to have like a digital audio workstation of some sort. And I'll show you what I use. I'll show you what I use. So, I use Reaper. That's my DAW. Whatever you use, as long as you know how to use it and it suits your preferences and how you work, that's all that matters for the DAW. As long as it works for you, perfection. If not, always find another one. Always find another one. There is no only use this one DAW. You can use whichever DAW works best for you, how you work. There's Reaper, Pro Tools, Studio One, Logic. Whichever one floats your boat is the one you should use. So I'll take this off for now. And take this off for now. And even though I'm not recording, why do I have that? Maybe I need to, especially when it comes to long form narration, you might run into some terms and some words you've never heard before, or you might need a brush up on how do I pronounce that? How do I enunciate that word? So having that the DAW up during the process for me would be a good way to like, hey, let me record now that I've heard this. And um, speaking of words or in terms that may be unfamiliar or even names, you're gonna want a resource of some sort. Sometimes it could be Youglish. There's plenty of resources out there. Or if you just want to have something up right in front of you to so that you can have that resource on standby. Like if you run into a word, or if you're not sure how a word is pronounced, especially in long form narration, you're gonna want to make sure you get that correct along the way. So that's gonna be important. All right. That being said, let me get this. Let me upload this PDF onto another. Let me upload this PDF onto another program to use. And actually, the program I'm going to use, only because it's easier for me personally, is actually the same program, same app I use for my music, Fourscore. Hello, 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 hello. Hello. I am doing good. I am doing good. I am doing good. Okay, let's see. Let's see. And especially with the pro, do I play games? I play games sometimes, yeah. Um, and especially for long form narration, if you're gonna mark up something, you need something to mark up with. Especially if you're using a tablet of some sort, so you're gonna need a stylus. That's going to be very important. And yeah, let's get to oh man, which games do I like the most? I tend to lean towards racing sims and RPGs for the most part. All right, let's get to the. All right, here we go. And before anyone asks, I was tasked to do this narration by someone else. Who? I'm going to keep that. You know what? Nah, I'll say it. Caleb Maupin from the Center of Political Innovation asked me to do a long form recorded narration of a snippet of a book of his that he asked. So I won't say which book. I'll keep that under wraps. But I'll just leave it at that. My day is going great. My day is going great. And let me get back to this. Luigi Mangione, the new abstract painter. All right, there you go. There is an odd parallel between what is written about effective counterinsurgency, so probably want to highlight that, and what was discovered about the individual human mind. I am from New York, Long Island, Brentwood, New York. During the same period, the Cold War, the very same intelligence agencies in the United States and Britain that were overseeing counterinsurgency operations were also trying to discover secrets of mind control. The term brainwashing was coined by Edward Hunter. Oh, cool. New Jersey? Edward Hunter, writing for the Miami News. This will be important. In 1950, John D. Marks's groundbreaking book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, describes the origins of the term that developed into a U.S. and British intelligence obsession. He, Edward Hunter, made up his coined word from the Chinese Xinao. Chinese Xinao. Actually, that would be perfect. All right. Xinao. 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 And while I do that, let me take name. Now mark that Xinao. Things happened. He, Edward Hunter, made up his coined word from the Chinese Xinao to cleanse the mind. Cleanse the mind, which had no political meaning in Chinese. Mark that up. All right, let me go back. Sure. Award-winning journalist Stephen Kinzer's book, The Prisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb, and the CIA Search for Mind Control. describes the historical context. Americans should have been able to celebrate the release of 7,200 soldiers from communist prisons after an armistice ended the fighting in Korea of July of 1953. Instead, they recoiled in shock. Many prisoners, it turned out, had written statements opposing the United States or praising communism. Some had confessed to committing crimes. 21 chose to stay behind in North Korea or China. The Pentagon announced they would be considered deserters and executed if found. With Project and King, as Marx notes in his books, by the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,190 U.S. prisoners held in China had either made confessions or signed petitions calling for an end to the American war in Asia. Thank you for the offer, but no thank you. Appreciate the offer. What do I think about the Anthony case? I'm not gonna lie, I lost track of that case, so I couldn't give you an honest opinion about it. I have to. I'm gonna have to relook more into that case so I could give a more fair, a, a fair take about it. Because as much as I can tell, I really don't know too much about that case, to be honest. By the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,190 U.S. prisoners held in China had either made confessions or signed petitions calling for an end to the American war in Asia. 15% had collaborated fully with the Chinese, and only 5% had steadfastly resisted. Worse, an alarming number of the prisoners stuck by their confessions after returning to the United States. They did not, as was accepted, recant when they stepped on U.S. soil, puzzled and dismayed. Yes, I have Instagram. They did not, as was accepted, recant when they stepped. Okay, but hold on. Did it start there? What happened? They did not, as was accepted, recant when they stepped on U.S. soil, puzzled and dismayed by the wholesale collapse of morale among POWs. American opinion leaders settled on Edwards' explanation. The Chinese had somehow brainwashed our boys. All right. The arrogance with which American media observed the POW scandal can't be overlooked. The reality is that the United States did indeed commit massive war crimes against the Korean people. The work of Bruce Cummings and other Korea scholars very well confirms that. The notion that the Korean people did not have the right to have a unified government in which the Korean Workers' Party participated alongside other parties hardly seems to morally justify the millions of deaths on the peninsula. The United States famously threatened to drop atomic bombs on China at one point during the war, and every building above one story in the okay, you're right, but what happened prior? Like, I don't want to just be like blanket statement. Yes, he deserves to do time, but I want to know the full details. That's why I didn't make any statements because I actually don't know the case like that. The idea that captured soldiers seeing this from another angle might, after being taken prisoner, apologize and denounce the war they had been sent to fight isn't hard to imagine without a huge dose of anti-communist assumptions. However, in the atmosphere of McCarthyism, the notion that some of the GIs may have been horrified by what they were ordered to do could not be entertained. Neither could the notion that any of the arguments of the Chinese or Korean captors were logically convincing. Kinzer noted the media response and the atmosphere that led to the decades of CIA research. Newsweek described them, the American POWs, as shifty-eyed and groveling. And said they had betrayed their country in exchange for better treatment. Because they had fallen in love with Asian women, or because of the appeal of homosexualism. No, I wasn't going to try to make it a case about is there two justice systems? Yes, but I don't want to just make it a blanket statement like, and yes, he did stab someone. I'm not excusing that. I just wanted to know because again, I never followed up on this case. I actually never have. But I'm just not going to be like, oh, he stabbed someone. Yes, he's got to serve time. But I want to get the full scope of what happened before and after everything. The media response in the atmosphere. Several commentators warned they represented the weakening of the American masculinity and the replacement by a generation of pampered kids and mama's boys. Beyond the nation's spiritual decline and the feminization of its men, another theory emerged: brainwashing. Regardless, the result was CIA Project Bluebird, that underlined, which eventually became MK Ultra, which eventually became Artichoke. All of it was the U.S. intelligence community trying to figure out how the Chinese and Soviet communists were able to brainwash people and then to develop their own methods for doing it. Don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. Stephen Kinzer describes the project as a kind of tragic comedy in which attempts to recreate what had been seen in horror movies. Understood. 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 And sometimes it can't just be about that, a black and white thing. And like I said, once again, I never really followed up on the case. I never really paid much attention to the case. So to be fair, I can't give a fair take on it. Stephen Kinzer describes the project as a kind of tragic comedy in which attempts to recreate what had been seen in horror movies and TV programs resulted in the CIA harming a lot of innocent people. Kinzer writes, two traumatic historical episodes, the testimony of Cardinal Mincensi, gonna have to come back to that. During his 1949 trial in Hungary and the behavior of American prisoners in Korea several years later, convinced senior CIA officers that communists had discovered the key to mind control. The stories they imbibed as children. Hold it. Let me go back to that. The stories they imbibed as children and adults made those fears seem real. Hold on. Let me. Let me. All right. This is another one. Imbibed. 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 All right. Let me have that on the ready case. All right. The stories they imbibed as children and adults made those fears seem real, lost in the blurry borderland between the fantasy and truth of mind control. They could not bring themselves to recognize the fantasy as the product of creative imagination. What the imagination could conceive, they believed the clandestine world could make real. MK Ultra was an attempt to invent a new reality. As John D. Marks described the program, the CIA built up its own elaborate brainwashing program, which, like the Chinese and Soviet versions, took its own special twist from our national character. It was a tiny replica of the Manhattan Project, grounded in the conviction that the keys to brainwashing lay in technology. Actually, we have that there. The program The program involved a number of infamous episodes, such as Operation Midnight Climax. All right, have that underlined. Where the CIA set up a brothel and lured men with prostitutes to a location where they could be dosed with LSD and studied. The program also involved the agency studying the art of harassing individuals in order to induce a psychological breakdown. John D. Marks quotes one agency veteran describing how disgusted he was with the cruelty dished out to individuals in the hopes of learning how to manipulate their behavior. That's why I couldn't even take reading the files after a while. I was sickened at seeing people take pleasure in other people's inadequacies. First of all, it was dumb. For all the money that went out, nothing ever came back. First, you'd check to see if you could destroy a man's marriage. If you could, that would be enough to put a lot of stress on an individual, break him down. Then you might start a minor rumor campaign against him, harass him constantly, bump his car in traffic. A lot of it is ridiculous, but it may have a cumulative effect. Right there. Marx quotes agency insiders telling how they would capture a few teenage members of a street gang, spend some time attempting to brainwash them, and then send them to rejoin their comrades and weaken the group from within. With gang warfare, says an MK Ultra source, you tried to get some defectors in place who would like to modify some of the group behavior and cool it. Now, getting a juvenile delinquent defector was motivationally not at all different from getting a Soviet one. At the same time that the US CIA was engaged in its mind control research, MI6 was utilizing British psychiatrist William Sargent across the pond. His ruthless sleep room experiments were revealed decades later to have resulted in at least a few deaths, as he kept people asleep for months at a time, drugged as he tried to influence their minds in their sleep. William Sargent published a book called The Mind Possessed in 1973, describing what much of his research had discovered about mind control, suggestibility, and its somewhat contradictory nature. Sargent wrote, "It is not the mentally ill but normal people who are the most susceptible to brainwashing, conversion, possession, the crisis, or whatever you wish to call it, and in their hundreds of thousands or millions fall readily under the spell of the demagogue or revivalist, the witch doctor, the pop group, the priest, or the psychiatrist, or even to a lesser degree, the propagandist or advertiser. At the root of this all too common human experience is a state of heightened suggestibility, of openness to suggestion and exhortations." Right here. Right here. He went on to write in the book's conclusion, "Suggestibility is, in fact, one essential characteristic of being normal. A normal person is responsive to other people around him, cares about what they think of him, and is readily open to their suggestion and influence. If the great majority of people were not normally suggestible, we could not live together in society at all. We could not collaborate in any undertaking. The originators of new ideas and the founders of new systems are rarely themselves normal people. If they were, they would drop their new notions comparatively quickly in the face of the hostility of their fellows. The schizophrenic and schizoid thinker is the most immune of all to outside influences dominating his ideas. His ideas come most often from inside himself and may be the product of hallucinations, delusions, and other abnormal thought processes which he experiences, and which he tries to explain on the basis of further delusional thinking. During the war, schizophrenics were rarely upset by bombing, for instance, being far too preoccupied with their own inner turmoils and worries." Sargent did conclude that if you wanted someone to have a dramatic political or religious conversion, it was necessary to put them under stress. Persons of hysteria temperament are also highly suggestible. Hysterical behavior. Let me get that right there. Is most commonly the result of normal people breaking down under severe stresses, as was seen again and again during the war. Faith healing and spirit possession rarely happen in a calm, rational atmosphere, as every witch doctor and faith healer knows all too well. Emotions must be aroused for success to be obtained. Beyond these observations on suggestibility, the CIA had roughly the same lack of real discoveries in its mind control research as MI6 did with Sargent, though John D. Marks quotes agency veterans describing results that clearly required some rather horrific methods. He wrote, By the time MK Ultra ended in 1963, agency researchers had found no foolproof way to brainwash another person. All experiments beyond a certain point always failed, says the MK Ultra veteran, because the subject jerked himself back for some reason, or the subject got amnesiac or catatonic. Agency officials found through work like Cameron's that they could create vegetables, but such people served no operational purpose. People could be tortured into saying anything, but no science could guarantee they would tell the truth. How many people were turned into vegetables by CIA operatives trying to discover the secrets of mind control? How many were tortured? The bulk of the program's records were destroyed before MK Ultra became public in the late 1970s, so we will never know. Consider that break as part of that done. And then right here, lassitude as a mechanism of control. It is widely understood that CIA research spread LSD onto college campuses during the 1960s, contributing to the rise of drug culture, and this is largely undisputed. The CIA was paying college students and prisoners to take LSD in order to study its effects. Some intellectuals seem to have enjoyed the experience, decided to keep using it, and even recruited their friends. The CIA was thoroughly disappointed in its hope that LSD could be used as a mind control drug. However, as John D. Marks quotes intelligence officials noting in search of the Manchurian candidate, the drug had another effect that proved very useful. This CIA veteran describes all the colors of the rainbow growing out of the cracks in the sidewalk. He had always disliked the cracks as a sign of imperfection, but suddenly the cracks became natural stress lines that measured the vibrations of the universe. The CIA official states, "You tend to have a more global view of things. I found it awfully hard, when stoned, to maintain the notion. I am a U.S. citizen, my country, right or wrong. You tend to have these good higher feelings. You are more open to the brotherhood of man idea, and you are more susceptible to the seamy sides of your own society." I think that's exactly what happened during the 1960s, but it didn't make people more communist. It just made them less inclined to identify with the U.S. They took a plague on both your houses' positions. That's a plague on both your houses' position. The New Left of the 1960s was the perfect shield against the emergence of any mass communist movement, and the perfect vehicle for deconstructing those that existed around the world. What was achieved on a society-wide scale in Northern Ireland, Italy, and Jamaica could also be achieved within the individual human mind. to prevent a light switch effect, to avoid a David versus Goliath scenario, as Kitson and Lind describe on the battlefield, could be done intellectually and psychologically with potential dissidents. The secret to defeating communism wasn't inducing mass fanatical anti-communism. Instead, it was inducing a kind of weary, unenthusiastic, plague on both your houses position and getting potential dissident fanatics into a dull state of indifference with a shades of gray perspective. Hmm. Okay, that change. No. The idea of avoiding direct confrontation to get what you want out of people is widely understood among sales and marketing researchers, as well as those who study the art of workplace management. The widely read 1937 self help book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, written by Dale Carnegie, contains this anecdote about how a manager convinced his employees to wear their hard hats. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator for an engineering company. Enid. One of his main One of his responsibilities is to ensure that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on the job in the field. He reported that whenever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority about the regulation and that they must comply. As a result, he would get silent acceptance, and often after he left, the workers would remove the hats. He decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hard hats, he asked if the hats were uncomfortable or did not fit properly. Then he reminded the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulation, with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of the futility of criticism bristling on 1,000 pages of history. But what the CIA discovered about LSD and how it reduced its own officers to feel neutrality toward the American government and no longer be annoyed by cracks in the sidewalk points to something of a far higher caliber. It also explains a huge amount of U.S. art, culture, and academic discourse, particularly in regards to notions that are considered left. The main way anti-establishment sentiments are contained among the U.S. population. The main intellectual counterinsurgency technique used today seems to be inducing lassitude. What is lassitude? Merriam, right here. Miriam, hold on, before I go on. What is lassitude? Merriam-Webster defines it in two ways. First, a condition of weariness or debility, and second, a condition characterized by lack of interest, energy, or spirit. Right here, we find the key to maintaining control, and we see the aim of the power structure when it perceives rising discontent. The goal is not to induce compliance through absolute terror of punishment and repression. In the long term, that will result in resentment. The goal is not to change our minds and convince us that the society we live in is acceptable. This is hardly possible, even under ideal conditions, as people always have something to be dissatisfied with. And especially as conditions worsen across the United States, it's a completely unrealistic goal. The power structure of the United States and the globalist imperialist system has devised a number of ways to induce lassitude, to make us passionless, without energy, without spirit, weary, debilitated, and thus not an obstacle in carrying out their transition to a low-wage police state and moves toward war. And right there, right there. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program of the CIA brought forth various thinkers who fixated on the notion of fascism. Rather than using the economic definition pioneered by Art Palmdutt and other communists during the Great Depression, that fascism was heavy-handed state control used to impose degrowth to stabilize the economy amid a crisis of overproduction. The Frankfurt School cultural Marxists defined fascism differently. Susan Sontag's New York Review of Books essay Fascinating Fascism insisted that German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl's photo exhibit of African tribes was fascist because it contained certain themes. Sontag wrote, fascism also stands for an ideal, or rather ideals, that are persistent today under other banners. The ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the disillusion of alienation, and the ecstatic feelings of community, the family of man. Although the Nuba are black, not Aryan, Riefenstahl's portrait of them evokes some of the larger themes of Nazi ideology. The contact between the clean and the impure, the incorruptible and the defiled, the physical and the mental, the joyful and the critical. Sontag went on to explain that she thought the fascist aesthetic was extravagant effort and the endurance of pain, the massing of groups of people, the turning of people into things, the multiplication and replication of things, and growing and grouping of people things around an all-powerful hypnotic leader figure or force. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgy. Ooh. Let me get that. Okay. Orgiastic. 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 The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transition. Tra- the fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in swelling numbers. Its choreography alternates between ceaseless motions and the congealed static virile posting. Virile. Let me double check if I'm saying that right. Let me double check. Okay. Virile. Virile. That's virile. 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 Its choreography alternates between ceaseless motions and the congealed static virile posing. Fascist art glorifies surrender. It exalts mindlessness. It glamorizes death. Mass athletic demonstration, a choreographed display of bodies, is a valued activity in all totalitarian countries. And the art of the gymnast, so popular now in Eastern Europe, also evokes recurrent features of fascist aesthetics: the holding in or confining of force, military precision, in both fascist and communist politics. The will is staged publicly in the drama of the leader and chorus. According to Sontag, a mass movement of any kind, in which people are pulling together to work for a cause and feeding off each other's energy, encouraging each other to be stronger and moving in coordination, is inherently fascist. The optimistic energy it gives off, we must assume, is also fascist. Hannah Arendt, Hannah Arendt. Let me go back to that. Hannah Arendt echoes these sentiments in her writing on totalitarianism. In her piece Eichmann in Jerusalem, focuses on how the Nazi war criminal was ordinarily man. Her piece Eichmann in Jerusalem focuses on how the Nazi war criminal was an ordinary man who had been part of the YMCA before joining the Hitler Youth. The message is, on the surface, about nonconformity. However, when you dig a little deeper, the message is much darker. The evils of the Nazi regime and the Holocaust are not rooted in the breakdown of capitalism, but rather in the inherent barbaric and cruel nature of human beings. The piece is intended to warn against the danger of any kind of mass movement in which the inherently cruel and evil rabble, with their banality of evil, can be unleashed. And with that, if there's no more questions, I'll call the stream off here. Some good questions, some good back and forths, but have a good day, y'all. Peace.